Nobody on Flight 402 noticed when the air conditioning was silently cut off in the last row. Nobody saw the two terrified 12-year-olds gasping for breath as a smiling flight attendant locked the bathroom door from the outside. But everyone, absolutely everyone, froze when the private jet landed on the tarmac mid-taxi, blocking the runway. They thought it was a terrorist attack. They were wrong. It was a father. And when the doors of that jet opened, the crew didn't just see a man. They saw the owner of the very airline they worked for, and he was looking for the woman who had just stopped his children's hearts. The morning sun glared off the polished fuselage of the massive Boeing 777 sitting at the gate of JFK International Airport, Flight 402 to London. Heathrow was fully booked, a tube of aluminum packed with tired tourists, anxious business executives, and crying infants. Standing at the entrance of the aircraft, greeting passengers with a smile that didn't quite reach her cold grey eyes, was Brenda Miller. Brenda had been a senior flight attendant for 20 years. To her superiors, she was efficient and punctual. To her junior colleagues, she was a tyrant. But to passengers who didn't fit her specific idea of worthy, she was a nightmare. Brenda adjusted her scarf, her eyes scanning the jet bridge. She hated the holiday rush. She hated the noise. But most of all, she hated it when people she deemed riffraff tried to act like they belonged in her domain. First class. "Welcome aboard, sir. Seat 4A to your left," she cooed to a man in a bespoke suit. Then she saw them. Walking down the jet bridge, holding hands tightly, were two black children. They were twins, a boy and a girl, no older than 12. They were dressed neatly. The boy, Elijah, wore a crisp polo shirt and khakis. The girl, Maya, wore a navy sundress. They looked terrified. They stopped in front of Brenda. Elijah held out 2 boarding passes with a trembling hand. Brenda didn't take them immediately. She looked them up and down, her lip curling slightly. "Unaccompanied minors?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Yes, Mom," Elijah said softly. "Our dad said the crew would take care of us." "We'll see about that." Brenda snatched the tickets. She glanced at the seat numbers. 1A and 1B, first class, the most expensive seats on the plane. The suites with the lie-flat beds and the privacy doors. Brenda laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Nice try, kid." "Mom?" Maya whispered, clutching her brother's hand. "These tickets." Brenda waved them in the air, not bothering to lower her voice. Passengers behind the twins were beginning to stack up, watching the scene unfold. "Where did you steal these from?" "We didn't steal them." Elijah's eyes went wide. "Our dad bought them. He's meeting us in London." Brenda leaned in close, her perfume cloying and heavy. "Listen to me. Systems glitch all the time. There is absolutely no way 2 kids like you are sitting in the first-class suites. Those seats are $5,000 apiece. Now, I don't know whose printer you hacked, but you're not sitting there." "But that's our seat assignment," Elijah insisted, though his voice was wavering. "Check the computer." "I don't need to check anything to know a fraud when I see one," Brenda snapped. She looked over the twins' heads to the line of passengers. "Folks, hold on. We have some stowaways trying to game the system." A few passengers grumbled about the delay. One man, a heavy-set guy in a Yankees cap, shouted, "Just kick 'em off if they don't have tickets." Brenda smirked at the twins. "See? Nobody wants you holding up the flight. Now I'm going to do you a favor. I'm not going to call the police. Yet. But you are not sitting in first class. You're going to the back. Row 58, by the toilets. That's the only space I have for charity cases." "We need to call our dad," Maya said, tears welling in her eyes. She reached into a small backpack for her phone. Brenda's hand shot out and snatched the phone before Maya could even unlock the screen. "Hey!" Elijah shouted. "Give that back!" "Electronic devices must be stowed during boarding," Brenda lied smoothly, slipping the iPhone into her apron pocket. "You'll get this back when we land, if you behave. Now, move. Back of the plane. Now." She physically spun Elijah around, her nails digging into his shoulder. The boy winced. Humiliated, with dozens of adults staring at them with suspicion or indifference, the twins lowered their heads. They walked past the luxurious first-class pods they were supposed to occupy, past the business-class seats, all the way down the long, narrow aisle to the very last row of the plane. As they sat in the cramped seats near the lavatories, the smell of disinfectant and stale air surrounding them, Maya began to sob. "It's okay," Elijah whispered, though his own hands were shaking. "Dad will fix it. When we land, Dad will fix it." Up in the front galley, Brenda Miller typed a command into the flight manifest computer. She manually overrode the assignment for seats 1A and 1B, marking them as no-show. "Problem solved?" asked a junior flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah who looked concerned. "Brenda, the manifest said their last name is Sterling. Isn't that—" "Sterling is a common name, Sarah." Brenda dismissed her, pouring herself a coffee. "Probably stole the credit card, too. I'm doing the airline a favor. We can upgrade those 2 Diamond members from business now. They'll appreciate it. The airline gets loyalty. I get a commendation. Watch and learn." Brenda didn't know it yet, but that last name, Sterling, was the most dangerous word she had ever ignored. The flight was 7 hours long. For most passengers, it was a time to sleep or watch movies. For Elijah and Maya, it was a descent into hell. Brenda had made it her personal mission to ensure the twins knew their place. It started small. When the beverage cart came around 45 minutes after takeoff, Sarah, the junior attendant, reached for 2 cans of apple juice. "No." Brenda's hand clamped over Sarah's wrist. "Brenda, they're kids," Sarah whispered, looking back at row 58. "They haven't had anything." "They are ticket scammers," Brenda hissed. "We don't waste inventory on scammers. If they want water, they can use the tap in the bathroom." She pushed the cart past the twins. Elijah raised his hand timidly. "Excuse me? Could we just get some water?" Brenda looked right through him, staring at the headrest above his head as she pushed the cart to the next row. "Service is concluded for this section," she announced loudly. "She skipped us," Maya cried softly. Her throat was dry. The air in the back of the plane was heavy and hot, and it was getting hotter. Brenda had gone to the rear environmental control panel. Usually the temperature was kept at a comfortable 72 degrees. With a malicious glint in her eye, Brenda adjusted the zonal temperature for the rear section. She cranked the heat up. It wasn't enough to trigger a cockpit alarm, but enough to make the air stagnant and suffocating, especially in the very last row where the circulation was poorest. "It's so hot," Elijah pulled at his collar. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "I don't feel good," Maya mumbled. She was asthmatic. The stress, the crying, and now the stifling heat were tightening her chest. She reached for her backpack to get her inhaler. Her hands searched the small bag frantically. "Eli, my inhaler." "It's not there?" Elijah asked, panic rising. I think I left it in the side pocket of the suitcase. The one they made us check at the gate," Maya wheezed. Elijah unbuckled his seatbelt. The fasten seatbelt sign was off. He stood up and ran to the galley where Brenda was reading a magazine. "Please," Elijah gasped. "My sister. She has asthma. It's too hot back there. She needs water. Please." Brenda didn't look up from her magazine. "Sit down, kid. Turbulence." "There is no turbulence. She can't breathe." Brenda slammed the magazine shut and stood up. She towered over the 12-year-old. "Are you raising your voice at a federal crew member? That is a felony, little boy. Do you want me to have the marshals arrest you when we land? Sit down." "She needs help," Elijah screamed. A passenger in row 55, a kind older woman named Mrs. Higgins, turned around. "Miss?" "The boy looks distressed. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, ma'am." Brenda put on her customer service smile. "Just a discipline issue. Please turn around." Brenda grabbed Elijah by the arm, harder this time, and marched him back to row 58. She shoved him into the seat. "One more word out of you," Brenda whispered, her face inches from his, "and I'll lock you in the lavatory for the rest of the flight. Do you understand me?" She looked at Maya, who was taking shallow, wheezing breaths. "And tell your sister to stop the drama. It's not that hot." Brenda turned on her heel and walked away. But she didn't just walk away. She went to the breaker panel in the galley. She flipped the switch for the in-flight entertainment screens in row 58, plunging the kids into boredom. But more importantly, she disabled the overhead attendant call button for their seats. "Let's see them ring for service now," Brenda muttered to herself. Back in row 58, Maya's head lolled against the window. Her skin was grey. "Maya! Maya, look at me." Elijah shook her. Her skin was burning hot, yet she was shivering. The heat in the back of the plane was oppressive, like a sauna. "Dad," Maya whispered, her eyes fluttering. "Call Dad." She took the phone, Elijah sobbed. He looked around. The passengers in front of them had their headphones on, oblivious to the medical emergency unfolding inches behind them. Elijah knew he had to do something. He couldn't just sit there. He unbuckled again, but this time, Brenda was watching from the end of the aisle. She held up a plastic zip tie, usually used for unruly passengers. She dangled it like a threat. Elijah froze. He looked at the zip tie, then at his dying sister. He made a choice. He didn't stand up. Instead, he reached into the seat pocket, grabbed the sick bag, and wrote on it with a crayon he had in his pocket. "Help. Sister dying. Flight attendant won't help. Call police." He crumpled the bag into a ball. He waited until Brenda turned to pour coffee for a passenger in row 50. Elijah threw the ball as hard as he could over the seats, aiming for Mrs. Higgins in row 55. It landed in her lap. Mrs. Higgins opened the crumpled bag. She read the scrawled, desperate note. She turned around and saw Elijah, tears streaming down his face, pointing at Maya, who was now slumped over, unconscious. Mrs. Higgins pressed her call button. Brenda arrived in seconds. "Yes, ma'am? Can I get you a drink?" "That child," Mrs. Higgins pointed a shaking finger at the back row. "She's unconscious." Brenda rolled her eyes. "She's sleeping, ma'am. They're just tired." "She's not sleeping. Look at her color." Mrs. Higgins unbuckled. "I was a nurse for 40 years. Let me see her." "Sit down," Brenda barked, her voice losing its sweetness. "You are interfering with flight crew duties." "And you are killing that child," Mrs. Higgins shouted, causing the entire cabin to go silent. At that moment, the plane banked sharply. The captain's voice came over the intercom, but it wasn't the usual calm drawl. It sounded strained. "Flight attendants, prepare for immediate arrival. We are being diverted." Brenda frowned. Diverted? They were over the Atlantic. There was nowhere to divert to, unless they were turning back, or unless they were landing in Iceland. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain continued, "we have been ordered by air traffic control to land immediately at the nearest airstrip due to a security status change regarding our aircraft." Brenda felt a knot of cold fear in her stomach. A security status change. She looked back at the twins. The boy, Elijah, was holding his sister's limp hand. He looked up at Brenda, not with fear anymore, but with a terrifying calmness. "You're in trouble," the boy whispered. Brenda laughed nervously. "I'm in charge here." But as the plane began a rapid, stomach-churning descent, Brenda Miller realized that her definition of "in charge" was about to be challenged by something much more powerful than a senior flight attendant badge. The cabin pressure seemed to drop along with the altitude, making ears pop and heads swim. The Airbus A350, usually a bastion of smooth engineering, shuddered as the pilots forced it into a steep, aggressive descent. In the rear galley, the atmosphere was toxic. Sarah, the junior flight attendant, was trembling as she strapped herself into the jump seat. She stared at Brenda, who was aggressively securing the latches on the meal carts with unnecessary force. "Brenda, we need to check on them," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "The lady in 55 said the girl was unconscious. If she dies—" "She isn't going to die, Sarah. Stop being dramatic," Brenda snapped, though a sheen of sweat had appeared on her own upper lip. "They are playing a game. It's a sympathy hustle. I've seen it 1,000 times. They want an upgrade, or a lawsuit, or a voucher." "But the pilot," Sarah pressed. "Why are we diverting to Halifax? The captain said, security status change. That usually means a bomb threat or a high-risk individual." "Exactly," Brenda hissed, narrowing her eyes at the last row. "High risk. I bet those kids are mules. Probably smuggling drugs in those backpacks. That's why they're unaccompanied. The authorities probably figured it out mid-flight. We are landing so the feds can haul them off my plane." Brenda convinced herself of this lie because the alternative, that she had made a catastrophic error, was too terrifying to contemplate. In row 58, the reality was far more grim. Maya was no longer shivering. She had gone limp, her breathing shallow and ragged, a terrifying rasping sound escaping her lips with every exhalation. The heat in the back of the plane, still cranked up by Brenda's vindictive hand, was stifling. "Maya, please," Elijah wept, unbuckling his seatbelt despite the fastened seatbelt light blazing overhead. "Wake up!" He needed to cool her down. He needed water. The lavatories. Elijah unbuckled Maya. She was dead weight in his arms, but adrenaline gave the 12-year-old boy the strength of a man. He dragged his sister out of the seat and into the narrow aisle. Brenda looked up from her jump seat. "Sit down! We are landing!" "She's burning up!" Elijah screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm taking her to the bathroom to put water on her face!" He dragged Maya toward the rear lavatory door. Brenda unbuckled her harness. She lunged across the galley, intercepting them just as Elijah managed to push Maya's limp body onto the cold floor of the small bathroom. "I told you to sit down!" Brenda yelled. She saw the other passengers craning their necks. Mrs. Higgins was standing up again. The situation was losing control. Brenda needed to contain it. She needed to hide the evidence of her neglect until the police arrived to take the criminals away. "Get in there." Brenda shoved Elijah into the small bathroom with his sister. "Wait, what are you doing?" Elijah cried as he stumbled backward over Maya's legs. "You want water? You want to cause a scene?" Brenda snarled. "You can stay in there until the marshals come get you. I'm not having you running around the cabin during a tactical landing." "No, please!" Elijah reached for the door. Brenda slammed the folding door shut. She flipped the locking mechanism on the outside, a latch designed for crew to seal off malfunctioning lavatories. "Click! Let us out!" Elijah pounded on the door. "It's tight in here. She can't breathe." "Shut up and brace for landing," Brenda shouted over the banging. She turned to the cabin, smoothing her skirt. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a containment situation under control." Inside the lavatory, the darkness was absolute, except for the dim strip lighting. The space was tiny, smelling of chemicals. For two terrified children, it was a coffin. Maya's rasping stopped. "Maya?" Elijah whispered in the cramped dark. He felt for her chest. It was still. "No, no, no," Elijah began to hyperventilate. He pounded on the door with both fists, screaming until his throat bled. "Help! Help us!" She stopped breathing. Outside, Sarah stood up, her face pale. "Brenda, let them out!" He said she stopped breathing. Brenda sat back in her jump seat and buckled the harness, her face a mask of stone. "He's lying. Sit down, Sarah. That's an order." Sarah hesitated. She looked at the locked door, then at Brenda's furious, terrifying glare. Decades of hierarchy and fear won out. Sarah sat down and buckled up, tears streaming down her face. She did nothing. And in the silence of the lavatory, Elijah Sterling held his sister's lifeless hand and prayed to a God he hoped was listening, because the humans on the other side of the door had abandoned them. The landing was hard. The wheels slammed onto the tarmac of Halifax Stanfield International Airport with a violence that shook the overhead bins open. Bags tumbled out. Passengers screamed, but the plane didn't taxi to the terminal. It slowed rapidly, the reverse thrusters roaring like dragons, and turned sharply onto a remote de-icing pad far away from the main gates. Brenda let out a breath she had been holding. Perfect, she thought. Remote isolation, standard protocol for arresting smugglers. She felt a grim satisfaction. She would write a report. She would say the children were disruptive, violent, and that she suspected trafficking. She would be the hero who spotted the mules. The plane came to a halt. The engines whined down. The silence that followed was heavy. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated." The captain's voice was shaky. "Do not stand up. Do not open overhead bins. Authorities are boarding the aircraft." Brenda unbuckled and stood up. She walked to the rear lavatory door. Elijah had stopped banging minutes ago. She hoped they hadn't made a mess in there. "All right, show's over," Brenda muttered, reaching for the lock. "Leave it," a voice boomed from the front of the plane. Brenda froze. It wasn't the captain. It wasn't over the intercom. It was a shout from the first-class cabin, carrying all the way to the back. She stepped into the aisle and looked forward. The front boarding door had been opened, but instead of a jet bridge, a mobile staircase had been attached, and standing at the top of the aisle, blocking the cockpit door, were two men in dark tactical gear, holding rifles. SWAT? Brenda thought, confusion rippling through her. For two kids. Then a man entered between the guards. He was tall, over 6 feet, wearing a charcoal wool coat over a dark turtleneck. He didn't look like police. He didn't look like a marshal. He looked like money, old, dangerous, infinite money. His face was unreadable, carved from granite, but his eyes were burning with a cold, blue fire that seemed to scorch everything they touched. It was Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global Holdings, the man who had just acquired a 51% controlling stake in Horizon Air, the very airline they were flying, 3 days ago. The crew in the front galley knew instantly. The purser, a man named David, actually dropped a coffee pot. It shattered, the glass tinkling loudly in the silent cabin. "Mr. Sterling," David stammered, his knees buckling. We didn't know." Marcus Sterling didn't even look at him. He walked down the aisle. His stride was long and purposeful. He didn't look left or right. He walked past the terrified passengers in first class. He walked past business class. Brenda stood at the back, her mouth dry. She recognized him now. She had seen his face on the cover of Forbes in the break room lounge. The billionaire turnaround king. Why is the owner here? Her mind raced frantically. The kids, the name, Sterling. The blood drained from Brenda's face so fast she felt dizzy. No, impossible. Marcus reached the back of the plane. He stopped 5 feet from Brenda. The air around him seemed to freeze. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't acknowledge her existence. He looked at the empty seats in row 58. Then he looked at the locked bathroom door. "Open it," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, a low baritone that vibrated in Brenda's chest. Brenda's hands shook so badly she couldn't lift them. "Sir, Safety protocol. They were unruly. Open the door." Marcus didn't yell. He didn't have to. The command was absolute. Brenda fumbled with the latch. She clicked it open. Marcus shoved her aside, hard. She stumbled into the galley counter, bruising her hip. Marcus ripped the folding door open. Elijah was huddled on the floor, cradling Maya's head in his lap. He looked up, his eyes swollen, his face a mask of trauma. When he saw the man in the wool coat, his face broke. "Dad!" Elijah wailed, a sound so full of pain it made Mrs. Higgins in row 55 burst into tears. "Dad, she won't wake up! She won't wake up!" Marcus Sterling dropped to his knees on the dirty bathroom floor. The billionaire ruined his $3,000 trousers without a thought. He scooped Maya's limp body into his arms. "Maya, baby girl," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. He checked her pulse. It was faint, thready. But there. "Medic!" Marcus roared, turning his head toward the front of the plane. "Now!" Two paramedics who had been waiting on the stairs sprinted down the aisle, pushing past the stunned flight attendants. They reached the back, carrying a trauma bag and an oxygen tank. "She has asthma," Marcus barked, his calm veneer cracking. "Severe. She's hypoxic. She's not responsive." "We got her, sir," one paramedic said, placing an oxygen mask over Maya's grey face. "Let's get her to the jet. The equipment is better there." Marcus stood up, lifting his 12-year-old daughter as if she weighed nothing. He held her tight against his chest. Elijah grabbed his father's coat, burying his face in the wool. "I got you, son. I got you both," Marcus murmured. He turned to leave. He began walking back up the aisle, carrying his daughter, his son clinging to his side. The paramedics followed close behind. The entire plane was silent. As Marcus reached row 20, he stopped. He didn't turn around. He just spoke, his voice carrying clearly to the back galley where Brenda was standing, paralyzed with terror. "Don't let that crew leave this aircraft," Marcus said to the tactical guard standing at the door. "If they try to step off this plane, arrest them." "On what grounds, sir?" one of the guards asked. Marcus turned his head slightly, his profile sharp and terrifying. "Attempted murder." He walked out of the plane, into the cold Canadian air, taking his children to the safety of his private Gulf Stream, leaving Brenda Miller alone in the back of the metal tube she had ruled like a tyrant, realizing that her reign was not just over. It was about to be dismantled, piece by painful piece. The silence on the aircraft after the passengers were evacuated was heavier than the roar of the engines had ever been. The economy cabin, usually a chaotic mess of wrappers and discarded magazines, was eerily still. The air conditioning hummed, but the air felt stagnant, tainted by the events of the last 7 hours. Brenda Miller sat in row 1, the first-class seat she had denied the twins. She wasn't sitting there in luxury, however. She was sitting there because a Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, officer was standing in the aisle, blocking her exit. Sarah, the junior flight attendant, sat in 1B, weeping silently into a tissue. The pilot and co-pilot were in the galley, speaking in hushed, terrified tones with a man in a dark suit who had arrived with the tactical team. "This is ridiculous," Brenda snapped, her voice shrill. She tried to cross her legs, but her hands were shaking too much. "I am a senior flight attendant with 20 years of service. I have a union rep to call. You cannot hold me here. I followed protocol regarding suspected stowaways and unruly minors." The RCMP officer, a stoic woman named Officer Clark, didn't even blink. You are detained pending a preliminary investigation into an incident of criminal negligence causing bodily harm. Sit down and be quiet." "Negligence?" Brenda scoffed, though her stomach churned with bile. "Those kids were scam artists. They stole tickets. They faked an asthma attack to get an upgrade. I see it every day." "Is that so?" The voice came from the boarding door. Marcus Sterling walked back onto the plane. He had removed his wool coat. He was in his shirt sleeves now, the cuffs rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they could crush stone. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were alert, predatory. He walked into the first-class cabin and stood in front of Brenda. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just looked at her with a disgust so profound it felt like a physical blow. "My daughter is in an induced coma on my jet," Marcus said softly. "The doctors are stabilizing her lungs. If she had arrived 10 minutes later, she would be brain dead." Brenda swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know they were your children. If I had known—" "Stop," Marcus held up a hand. "Do not finish that sentence. Because if you say, 'If I had known they were rich, I would have treated them like humans,' I will lose my temper. And you do not want me to lose my temper." He pulled a chair from the galley, a small jump seat, and placed it directly in front of her, sitting down so he was eye level. "I want to understand," Marcus said, his voice dangerously calm. "I want to understand the logic. Walk me through it. You see 2 children. They have valid tickets. You deny them their seats. Why?" The system," Brenda stammered. "It glitches. People steal credit cards. They didn't look like they belonged in first class." "They didn't look like they belonged," Marcus repeated slowly. "Because they are black? Or because they are children?" "No, I'm not racist," Brenda cried, the standard defense flying from her lips. "It was a judgment call. They were unaccompanied." "They were unaccompanied because their mother died 6 months ago," Marcus said, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Sarah, in the seat next to Brenda, let out a loud sob. Brenda paled. "They were flying to London to meet me for the unveiling of her memorial foundation," Marcus continued, his eyes drilling into Brenda's soul. "I bought the tickets. I paid for the unaccompanied minor service, which guarantees constant supervision and care. And instead, you threw them in the back. I moved them for safety," Brenda lied. She was digging deeper, unable to stop. And then the boy, he became violent. He was shouting, running in the aisles. Marcus turned his head slowly to Sarah. "You," he said. "What is your name?" "Sarah," the young woman whispered. "Sarah Jenkins." "Sarah, look at me." Sarah lifted her tear-stained face. "My son, Elijah. He's 12. He plays chess. He cries when he steps on a bug. Did he become violent?" Sarah looked at Brenda. Brenda's eyes were wide, a silent plea, or perhaps a threat, conveying, "Don't you dare snitch." But the power dynamic had shifted. Brenda was no longer the queen of the cabin. The man in front of them owned the sky. "No," Sarah whispered. "Sarah!" Brenda hissed. "No!" Sarah screamed, the dam breaking. "He wasn't violent. He was begging. He begged for water. He begged for her inhaler. Brenda wouldn't let me give them juice. She wouldn't let me check on them." "She's lying," Brenda shrieked. "She's incompetent. She's trying to save her own skin." "Did she lock them in the bathroom?" Marcus asked Sarah, ignoring Brenda entirely. Sarah nodded, trembling violently. "Yes. Elijah tried to take Maya to the sink to cool her down because it was so hot. Brenda shoved them in and used the external latch. She said she didn't want them contaminating the cabin before the police arrived." Marcus closed his eyes. His jaw muscle feathered. He took a deep breath, fighting the urge to do something that would send him to prison. He stood up. "Officer Clark," Marcus said to the RCMP officer, "I think you have enough for the arrest now." "Wait! No!" Brenda stood up, panic finally shattering her composure. "You can't arrest me. It's her word against mine. I have seniority. I have rights. I want the union rep. You have no proof of anything other than a he-said-she-said situation." Marcus looked at her with a cold, terrifying smile. "You think this is a he-said-she-said situation?" Marcus reached into his pocket. "Brenda, I didn't just buy this airline. I bought the technology company that services it. Do you know what the modernization retrofit includes?" He pointed to the ceiling, to a small, dark dome above the cockpit door. "Internal cabin telemetry and audio monitoring for cockpit safety, but we haven't even gotten to the digital footprint yet." He turned to the boarding door. "Bring him in." A man in a Horizon Air maintenance jumpsuit walked in, carrying a laptop and a thick cable. He looked nervous but determined. "Plug it in," Marcus ordered. Brenda watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the technician plugged the laptop into the flight attendant control panel in the galley. "Let's see the logs," Marcus said. "Let's see just how innocent you are." The technician, a man named Gary who had worked on these planes for 15 years, typed rapidly. The screen of the laptop was projected onto the bulkhead monitor so everyone could see. "Okay, pulling the CMS, cabin management system, logs for the last 8 hours, Gary said. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, timestamps, user IDs, commands. "Here," Gary pointed. "Timestamp 10:42 a.m., user ID, B. Miller, Iran 99. "Read it," Marcus commanded. "Manual override, Zone 5, temperature control," Gary read. "Target set, 88 degrees Fahrenheit, fan speed, low." The cabin went silent. "You turned the heat up," Marcus whispered. "You cooked them." It was cold back there," Brenda stammered. "I was trying to make them comfortable." "By setting it to 88 degrees? Gary looked at her with disdain. "Standard cabin temp is 72. You practically turned the back of the plane into an oven. And look at this." He highlighted another line of code. "Timestamp 11:15 a.m. User ID, B. Miller 099. Command, disable PSU, passenger service unit, rows 50 through 58, call buttons deactivated." "You took away their voice," Marcus said. "You knew they were in distress, and you cut the line." I... Brenda was hyperventilating now. They were playing with the buttons. It was a nuisance. "And this," Gary scrolled down to the end of the log. "Timestamp 1:30 p.m. Lavatory smoke, occupancy sensor. Door status, locked externally. Duration, 42 minutes. Marcus turned back to Brenda. 42 minutes. You locked 2 terrified children in a 3x3 box with no ventilation while my daughter suffocated. I didn't know she was sick," Brenda screamed, tears of self-pity streaming down her face. "I didn't know." "Mr. Sterling?" A voice came from the jet bridge. A woman walked onto the plane. It was Mrs. Higgins, the passenger from row 55. She was clutching her purse, her face set in a grim line. "I was told to leave," Mrs. Higgins said, ignoring the police officer. "But I refused to go until I spoke to the father." Marcus stepped toward her. "I am the father." Mrs. Higgins reached into her handbag. She pulled out a crumpled, stained air sickness bag. She handed it to Marcus with a shaking hand. "The little boy, he threw this at me," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice breaking. "He threw it because he couldn't call for help. I tried to ring the bell, but she pointed a finger at Brenda. "She told me to sit down or I'd be arrested." Marcus smoothed out the crumpled paper. He read the crayon message. "Help. Sister dying. Flight attendant won't help. Call police." Marcus stared at the note. His hand crunched the paper into a fist. "This isn't negligence," Marcus said. his voice low and vibrating with fury. "This is malice." "And there's one more thing," Officer Clark interrupted. She stepped forward to Brenda. "Stand up." "Why?" Brenda whimpered. "Search incident to arrest," Clark said. She reached into Brenda's apron pocket, the one Brenda had been guarding instinctively. Clark pulled out a rose gold iPhone with a glittery case. "My daughter's phone," Marcus said. "She has a tracker on it. I saw it moving on the tarmac." "Theft," Clark listed. "Forcible confinement. Criminal negligence causing bodily harm. And given the evidence of the heat tampering, we might be looking at torture." "Torture?" Brenda shrieked. "I'm a flight attendant. I'm not a monster." "You are exactly what you are," Marcus said, cold, "and you are done." A man in a sharp grey suit entered the cabin. He carried a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Vance, the chief legal officer for the airline. He looked pale. He had been on the phone with Marcus for the last 20 minutes. "Mr. Vance?" Marcus didn't even look at him. "Do it." Mr. Vance walked up to Brenda. He didn't offer a handshake. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. "Brenda Miller," Vance said, his voice professional and devoid of pity. "Effective immediately, your employment with Horizon Air is terminated for cause. You are stripped of all pension benefits, travel privileges, and severance." "You can't do that," Brenda screamed. "The union—" "The union has already been contacted," Vance said, adjusting his glasses. "They have reviewed the logs and the passenger statements. They have declined to represent you. You are on your own." Brenda looked around the cabin. She looked at Sarah, who looked away. She looked at the pilot, who was staring at the floor. She looked at Marcus, who was looking at her like she was a stain on his shoe. "Officer," Marcus said, "get her off my plane." Officer Clark spun Brenda around. "Hands behind your back." As the handcuffs clicked, a cold metallic sound that signaled the end of Brenda's life as she knew it, she began to sob. Not for the children, not for the pain she caused, but for herself. "Wait, please!" "Mr. Sterling," Brenda wailed as she was marched toward the door. I'm sorry, I have a mortgage. I have bills. Please don't ruin my life." Marcus watched her go. He waited until she was at the door, struggling against the officer. "I didn't ruin your life, Brenda," Marcus called out, his voice echoing in the empty first-class cabin. "You did. I'm just the bill collector." As Brenda was dragged down the mobile stairs, screaming into the cold Halifax wind, Marcus turned to Sarah. Sarah flinched. I'll hand in my resignation," Sarah whispered. "No," Marcus said. He looked at the young woman. "You tried. You failed, but you tried, and you told the truth today." He walked past her, toward the exit to go back to his dying daughter. "You're suspended pending retraining," Marcus said over his shoulder. "But you keep your job. Because unlike her, you actually have a conscience. Don't make me regret it." Marcus walked out of the plane, leaving the wreckage of his airline behind him, stepping onto the tarmac where the flashing lights of the ambulance and police cruisers painted the night in chaotic bursts of red and blue. The nightmare on the plane was over, but the nightmare in the hospital was just beginning. For 72 hours, the private wing of the QII Health Sciences Center in Halifax was a fortress. Security guards employed by Sterling Global Holdings manned every elevator and stairwell. The world outside was a cacophony of flashing cameras and shouting reporters, but inside room 404, the silence was deafening. Marcus Sterling, a man who moved markets with a whisper, sat in a plastic hospital chair that was too small for his frame. He looked like a ghost. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his tie discarded days ago. He held the small, limp hand of his daughter, Maya. She was intubated. The tube taped to her mouth was a stark, horrifying contrast to her soft, youthful face. The ventilator hissed rhythmically. Hiss, click, exhale, doing the work her lungs were too traumatized to do on their own. The hypoxia was severe. Dr. Aristhorne, the chief neurologist, had explained gravely on the first night. The heat stress, combined with the asthma attack and the lack of oxygen, her brain was starved. We have induced a coma to let the swelling go down. We just have to wait. Elijah, the boy who had saved her, refused to leave the room. He slept on a cot pushed against the wall, waking up every hour to check the monitors. He wasn't a child anymore. The flight had stripped that away. He had the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier. "She's strong, Eli," Marcus whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "She's a sterling, she fights." "She wouldn't have to fight if they had just listened," Elijah said, his voice cold. It was a tone Marcus recognized. It was his own. On the fourth morning, the rhythm of the ventilator changed. Maya triggered the assist breath. Her eyelashes fluttered. The doctors rushed in, and hours later, the tube was out. When she finally spoke, her voice was a broken whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. "Daddy, is the bad lady gone?" Marcus leaned in, brushing the hair from her sweaty forehead. His eyes, usually blue ice, were melting with relief. "She's gone, baby, and I promise you, she is going to a place much smaller and much hotter than that bathroom." While Maya learned to breathe again, Brenda Miller was learning that her life was over. The story had not just broken, it had exploded. The hashtag #HarkerFlight402 was trending worldwide. Leaked audio of the cockpit communications and the cabin logs had hit the internet. The public revulsion was absolute. Brenda wasn't just a villain. She became the global face of cruelty. She sat in an interrogation room at the RCMP headquarters. She wasn't wearing her uniform anymore. She was in a grey sweatsuit, looking stripped and vulnerable. Across from her sat not just the local police, but a federal prosecutor named Joyce Carlton, known in legal circles as the Butcher. "I want a deal," Brenda said, her voice shaking, but still carrying a trace of her old arrogance. "I'll plead to negligence if you drop the confinement charges. I have 20 years of unblemished service." Joyce Carlton laughed. It was a dry, terrifying sound. She opened a thick file on the metal table. "Unblemished. We subpoenaed your personnel file, Miss Miller. We found 42 complaints in the last decade. Racial profiling, rudeness, refusal of service. Your management buried them because the union was strong. But the union isn't here today, is it?" Brenda swallowed hard. I was doing my job, the safety of the aircraft." "We have the logs, Brenda," Carlton interrupted, leaning forward. "We know you overrode the temperature controls. We have the technical analysis proving you manually locked the lavatory from the outside. That isn't negligence. That is premeditated torture. You cooked 2 children to teach them a lesson." The trial that followed was the most watched legal event of the year. Brenda's defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who clearly didn't want to be there, tried to argue that Brenda was suffering from acute situational stress and hypoxia-induced judgment error. It fell apart the moment Sarah Jenkins took the stand. Sarah, looking poised and brave, recounted every detail. She described the smirk on Brenda's face when she denied the twins water. She described the way Brenda had called them scammers while eating a chocolate bar in the galley. She enjoyed it, Sarah told the jury, tears in her eyes. She wanted them to suffer because she thought they didn't belong in first class. She told me, "Watch and learn." That's what she said. But the nail in the coffin was Marcus Sterling's victim impact statement. He didn't yell. He stood at the podium, dressed in a black suit, looking every inch the titan of industry. He looked directly at Brenda, who refused to meet his eyes. "My wife died 6 months ago," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "These tickets were a gift to my children to bring them to her memorial. Ms. Miller didn't just lock my children in a bathroom. She took the last remaining piece of their innocence and crushed it under her heel. She played God with my daughter's breath. There is no sentence this court can impose that equals the terror of a 12-year-old boy holding his dying sister in the dark." The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. Guilty on all counts: 2 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of forcible confinement, child endangerment, criminal negligence. Judge Harrison, a stern man with no patience for cruelty, looked down at Brenda over his spectacles during sentencing. "Miss Miller, you showed no mercy to those children. You showed no remorse during this trial. You only showed concern for your pension and your reputation. You are a danger to the public." "Your Honor, please," Brenda sobbed, finally breaking as the reality set in. "I'm 50 years old. Prison will kill me." "Then perhaps you will understand how Maya Sterling felt," Judge Harrison replied coldly. "I sentence you to 14 years in a federal penitentiary with no eligibility for parole for 7 years. As the bailiffs shackled her, Brenda looked to the back of the courtroom. She saw Marcus Sterling. He wasn't smiling. He just nodded, once, a final seal of fate. But Marcus wasn't done. The criminal court took her freedom. The civil court took her life. Marcus's lawyers unleashed a barrage of lawsuits that were clinically devastating. They sued for emotional distress, medical punitive damages, and loss of enjoyment of life. Because Brenda was in prison, she couldn't maintain her mortgage. The bank foreclosed on her pristine suburban home within 3 months. Her pension, which she had protected so fiercely, was garnished to 0 to pay the court-ordered restitution. Her car was repossessed. Even her friends turned on her. Former colleagues gave interviews to tabloids, selling stories of her bullying for a quick buck. Brenda Miller was erased. She entered prison with nothing. No money, no home, no legacy, just a number on a jumpsuit and a reputation that would ensure she was the most hated inmate in the block. 6 months later. The winter snow had melted, and the spring sun was shining over Heathrow Airport in London. A sleek Gulfstream GO50, painted in the new livery of Sterling Airways, touched down smoothly. Elijah and Maya walked down the stairs of the private jet. They looked different. Elijah stood taller, his shoulders broad. Maya, fully recovered, wore a bright yellow coat, her asthma now managed by the best specialists in the world. Waiting for them on the tarmac was Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't a flight attendant anymore. She was wearing a blazer and holding a clipboard. Marcus had promoted her. She was now the director of passenger experience for the entire airline. Her job was to ensure that what happened to the twins never happened to another human being. "Welcome to London," Sarah smiled, hugging Maya warmly. "How was the flight?" "Perfect," Maya beamed. "The crew was really nice." Marcus stepped off the plane behind them. He shook Sarah's hand. "The new protocols are working, Sarah. Customer satisfaction is up 40%. "We're just treating people like people, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said humbly. "It's amazing how rare that is," Marcus replied. He looked over at Mrs. Higgins, who had flown with them as a guest of honor. The elderly former nurse was beaming, holding a pamphlet for the Maya Sterling Respiratory Health Wing at the local children's hospital, which her scholarship was helping to staff. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Higgins said, patting his arm, "you turned a tragedy into a revolution." "We tried," Marcus said, watching his children run toward the waiting car. "We tried." Far away, in a cold, concrete cell at the Nova Institution for Women, the lights flickered. The heating system in the prison was old and unreliable. It was stiflingly hot in the cell block, almost 90 degrees. Brenda Miller sat on her thin cot, sweating. She gasped for air, fanning herself with a piece of paper. She banged on the heavy metal door. "Guard, it's too hot! I can't breathe!" she screamed. A guard walked by. He didn't stop. He barely glanced at the small window. "Quit whining, Miller." The guard's voice faded as he walked away. "System glitch. You'll just have to wait." Brenda slid down the wall to the floor, the heat pressing in on her, the silence of the cell mocking her. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she truly understood the darkness she had forced upon 2 children. But this time, no billionaire father was coming to open the door. The story of Flight 402 is a harrowing testament to the terrifying reality of unchecked authority. Brenda Miller believed her uniform made her untouchable, allowing her prejudices to endanger the most vulnerable among us. But she forgot the most fundamental law of the universe. The higher you position yourself above others, the harder the fall when the foundation crumbles. Marcus Sterling didn't just use his wealth to exact revenge. He used it to enforce justice, proving that while money can buy power, only humanity can earn respect. I honestly got chills writing that ending. It's rare to see karma hit that precisely, isn't it? Brenda finally feeling the heat, literally, is the kind of poetic justice we don't see enough of. What do you guys think? Did Marcus go too far by taking her house and pension? Or did she deserve to lose absolutely everything for what she did to those kids? I want to read your debates in the comment section. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us create more long-form stories like this one. And make sure you are subscribed with the notification bell turned on so you're the first to hear the next saga. Stay safe, treat people with kindness, and I'll see you in the next video.